Hello everyone, welcome back to a watercolor tutorial. We are going to be painting this photo that I took on a walk the other day. I posted it on Instagram and you guys seem to really want a tutorial for it. So I'm just going to be looking at it, in front of me here, but I may or may not post the reference photo. Regardless, you don't need the reference photo. If you just pretend that this is from my imagination, then you wouldn't need the reference photo in the first place. So I've got my piece of paper in portrait position, and I just have drawn two lines for reference for myself. One is the horizon line, or rather where the land touches the water. And the second line is my horizon line. So this strip here is the lake, okay? But we're going to start off with just painting a very light gradient for the sky because I've got a beautiful blue sky in my picture. And the camera, or the phone camera, basically warps the sky a little bit and makes it look extremely white towards the bottom, which is due to the brightness of the sun since it's facing the sun. So here I'm just applying a light blue gradient up until, and you know what, we're just gonna actually include the lake. So we're gonna go beyond the horizon line up to the edge of the land where the land touches the water, because it's going to be the same color anyway, and we're going to define this horizon line a little bit later with some of those, I wouldn't call them mountains, after what I've just seen. Which, by the way, this is my first video that I'm filming since I got back from my trip, so I know a lot of you were like, oh, what was the big news? And that's because I kind of mixed up the order of my videos. And yeah, so we did end up going to Europe, and we went to the mountains in Italy, the Dolomites specifically, and I have a lot of really intense, beautiful photos from that trip, which I will use as reference in a future tutorial. But if you guys follow me on Instagram, then you would have already seen like a plethora of content from my trip. So if that gives you any incentive to follow me on Instagram, then that's good. So I think I'm pretty happy with my sky. Like, it's almost completely white in my picture anyways, so I'm just going to let this completely dry before we carry on with the sky. But before I move on, I'm just going to do the bottom section here. So I have my road and I have grass on either side, which is totally covered by beautiful orange and yellow leaves. So my road is sort of this, it's gravel. So I'm going to mix a little bit of brown with black and create this little or light wash and just paint that over the road. And then we'll kind of go over it with a ton of leaves anyway, so it doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be perfect. So I'm leaving like the thinnest gap between the water and the end of the road there because I don't want the water to bleed into the road and vice versa. And before my road starts drying, I'm going to add some orange to it. just so that when I paint on my leaves a little bit later, it's not gonna look completely, like I won't have to paint on every single individual leaf. I'll have already a background of color established for the leaves. So I'm just going over the sides of the road and the middle to make it look like, you know, there's tire tracks, which there are in the photo that I'm working with. And I'm even going to go off of the road here with my leaves on both sides. And as usual, I know it doesn't look very good at the moment, but not to worry. It will all come together at the end, I hope. If you see this tutorial, it means it came together in the end. If you don't, then it's scrapped. Because that happens. There are a few that I have really high hopes for, and I trust the process, but then, you know, sometimes the process does not trust you. And you just have to try again. So try to have very like rough edges with the leaves so that they're a little bit more rounded on this side than this side, which I don't like, and it's because I'm right-handed, so it's hard to create the same effect with the leaves, but you want them to look like leaves rather than, you know, perfect round shapes. So keep that in mind as you're painting your leaves. Okay, so now I'm going to, the sun in my photo is shining over here, so it's turning the grass in that section almost yellow. So that's, I'm just gonna paint this section yellow up until about there. It's kind of casting the sun like that. But I am going to add a little bit of lime green in there because I do know it is grass, so it's not completely yellow. So and this section here is also showing, because this section on the side here is actually quite in the shade, the very green grass is showing through. So I am going to just paint that with a more intense green. And we're gonna have fence posts coming up. I don't know if you saw those originally. I drew them very, very, very lightly with pencil first for myself. So I'm just kind of gently following the route that the fence posts are starting from, because they'll be just a straight diagonal line like that. So you're welcome to do the same. It'll help define the fence posts a little bit as well. The green that you use also does not matter. It's whatever. Okay, I think I am okay with that. So this yellow actually morphs into like a brownish orange as the shade begins to mix in. Because I guess I should say we're going to be painting these massive trees coming from the left side, and those are what are casting shade according to my reference photo. Just so you don't get confused as to why I keep adding shade in everywhere. That looks a tiny bit messy there, but we will fix it later with more detailed leaves and such. So I'm gonna just do the same on this side. I'm gonna add just a tad bit of green. I'm going to have a tree that starts about here, but you'll only see the right side of the stump. So it'll come like this, and then I'll have another tree about here coming up, and then a couple more trees like this. I know that basically doesn't show you anything, but that's okay. It's just for myself. It's not too important. So just add a little bit of green. Not on your road, because that would not make sense given that it's a gravel road. And then the rest with that same brownish orange color that we used on that side. Mine is a bit too intense. Okay, so we've got our, background wash, I would call it, down. So we have our road here. We have 2 lines on either side of green that are marking on the right side our fence posts, and on the left side our trees. And mine is like half dry, which is okay. So I am going to start adding some of the leaf details. So I'm going to be using yellow, orange, and brown, just making sure that I'm accounting for the differences in shade. So sun is being cast basically where I painted the yellow. So this part is going to be a brighter color, and everything else is in the shade according to my reference photo. I'll just show you it actually real quick, what I meant. See this brighter yellow here? So that's what I painted. And everything else here is in shade that is being cast by these massive trees on the left. So you want to use more subdued colors on the shaded part. That's why my orange is going to be quite a bit duller than the orange. Not that I'm going to be using too much orange there, because it's going to be mostly yellow, but just keep that in mind when you're painting. your leaves. So now we're just going over those same areas that you painted the first time, where we wanted to make it look like there was where we were laying the background for the leaves. And here I'm just going over it again. And it's easier if you don't have too much pigment on your paintbrush, and then you just sort of dab, because if you have too much pigment, it creates these very rounded shapes where the edges are quite uniform, and we don't want that because leaves don't look like that. So take a bit of pigment on your paintbrush and dab. So on my picture, on my reference photo, I do have some leaves that they kind of come onto the road as well. So don't feel like you have to do exactly what I'm doing. Just use your imagination, pretend this is a road that you are looking at, and paint it according to what you would want it to look like. Or you can just follow along. That works too. So you can, after you've done one layer, you can pick up a little bit more pigment and just go over the exact same sections to make those details really pop. So I'm going to start mixing in a little bit of a yellow tone as I move towards that brighter area. Whoops, picked up some green there. So this looks a little bit too wishy-washy for me. Because it's so far away, you likely won't see so many tiny leaf details. So I'm very lightly blending it together. Like so. And this road, it kind of turned into this light orange color, and I didn't want it to be, I wanted it to be gray because it's gravel. So I'm just taking some gray and adding some tire tracks, I guess you could call it. It's a little bit better, I suppose. I'm gonna just switch to a smaller brush. So this is my size 1 Winsor & Newton, and I'm just gonna add a few more details using the smaller brush because the bigger one holds a lot of pigment and it's really hard to keep drying it out, and it's also not good for the brush using that dabbing motion that I was using. It's a bit too harsh for it, and I really like that brush, so I'm not going to do that. So I'll zoom in so you have a better idea of what I'm doing with the leaves here, or the brush strokes I'm using. It's kind of just like using the tip of the brush and trying not to create rounded brush strokes, like trying to be as sporadic, random, and jagged and effortless as possible. So the more loose that you are with your brush strokes and the more gentle you are with how you're pressing onto the piece of paper, the more natural your leaves will look. Like, honestly, the best advice if you want to practice these leaves is to put the pigment on your paintbrush, obviously. Put your paintbrush to paper and then close your eyes. Close your eyes and do the motion of what you think an abstract leaf would look like. And chances are it'll be a lot more natural looking than if you had intentionally tried to paint a leaf. If you do try that, let me know if it works for you. And obviously you can't, like, it won't work if you just do like one leaf, one brush stroke. You gotta just keep going and do a whole section in order for it to look completely natural. By the way, a few people have asked about my Patreon recently. I know I made one once upon a time ago, but I didn't actually put anything on it. If you wish to support my art financially, I have added the thanks button it's under every single video. Thank you to one of my subscribers who even, notified me that this exists. And that's one way that you can financially thank me if you're interested in doing that. It's very greatly appreciated. Otherwise, your likes and comments and your views are very helpful. So thank you for watching my videos. I'm just gonna zoom back out because I think you got the idea, but doesn't that look a lot more natural? I think it does, at least. And it's easier to start out with like either a lighter color or just a lighter shade of a color, and then you can gradually progress with darker layers on top. And that's why we applied that wash initially. All right, we're just gonna leave it at that for now. I'm not totally happy with that, but whatever. We're just gonna move on to the next part, which my phone turned off. Okay. Actually, I'm just gonna kind of fill in this section a little bit more because in my reference photo, there's a much more gradual transition from this section to the very light colored section. So I'm taking a very washed out brown right now and I'm abusing my brush in the way that it should not be used. But I just want a more gradual transition to that part. So that looks a little bit more gradual, I think. Methinks. Okay. Okay, so the next thing that I was initially going to paint the trees next, but I realized that if I do that, then painting the horizon and everything that goes across is going to be a little bit more difficult. So instead we're going to paint the horizon first, as well as this section where the land meets the water. So I've got a bunch of grass and reeds and stuff like that growing here. So I'm going to do that second. I'm first going to do the horizon. So my horizon, because the sun is shining on it, is extremely washed out. So I'm going to paint it on very lightly first, just a general line. I am mixing in some black here. just across like that. And then it appears there's like two sections, I guess, to my horizon. And keep in mind this mountainous area, it's not a mountain, it's like, they call it the mountain here, but it's not a mountain. This hill is just all trees. So I'm gonna keep this section a little bit darker and washed out. And then that's gonna go up, but I'm going to add some orange and yellow to this section because it's a little bit more in the sun. There we go. And then here it's like a nice intense orange. There isn't any red, but I'm gonna add some red. Balance it out with some brown and yellow. So you can just play around with the colors. I'm just sticking with the traditional yellow, brown, a little bit of red. Et voila. I think that is satisfactory. I am going to add, because this section kind of overlaps a tiny, tiny smidge. So I do want it to be a little bit darker. Okay, we've got most of the boring stuff out of the way. We can actually start painting the fun details that are gonna make this whole thing kind of come together, come alive. So we can start with the part that the land touches the water. Like I said before, I've got all these tiny reeds and things growing. So I'm kind of going to follow the photo. So I'll show you again. This section here. So I've got like a tree, another tree, and then all these tiny little reed things growing. So one of the trees has already lost all its leaves. I'm gonna start with the stuff that doesn't overlap with the horizon because my horizon is still wet. So it is a bit of a darker section there. So I'm just trying to paint that on without showing like a super harsh contrast. Oops, too much water. That's gonna cauliflower for sure. I'm gonna switch to my size quadruple 0 Winsor Newton. one of my favorite brushes for detail work. And I'm just gonna paint on those reeds and whatever the heck they are growing. They're very, very small and detailed, so that's when you whip this guy out to save the day. So I'm just gonna go a little bit closer again. So you get the idea of what I'm doing there. I'm gonna add a little bit of black, or it might be blue. It's hard to tell. It was already on my palette, like wet on my palette, and it was a dark color, so I just took it. Yeah, see, now it's like there's something there. It's starting to look like something. Whereas before it was just this one giant blob of color everywhere. And don't be afraid to take your time with this. It doesn't have to be rushed. Although these longer tutorials are kind of too long for me. I prefer the really dramatic, striking, quick ones. But you know, good things take work and time. So I've got a really thin tree that's coming from here. A thinly stumped, I should say. It's kind of growing. Ah, yeah, see, that's wet. Ay, ay, ay. Okay, I'm gonna come back. I'm gonna blow dry this and then we'll continue. Okay, we're back. So I blow dried that so that it's completely dry. Well, I blow dried it for like 10 seconds, so I don't actually know if it's dry. But we're gonna make the stump a little bit thicker to compensate for the bleeding of that watercolor. Because that was not the intention. Sometimes you can get away with the background still being wet if you just use pigment that doesn't, like, without a lot of water. But yeah, this one was just too wet. So again, I'm using my quadruple zero brush for this detail work. It's linked in the description if you're interested. And when you use my links, even if you don't buy the products in the links, you just use my links, and then from that same tab, or from the link, you just search for something else. It still gives me commission. So it's no extra cost to you, but it does help me out. So if you ever need to buy anything on Amazon, just click one of my links first and then go from there. That's another way that you can support if you wish. Okay, that tree is fine. I'm gonna paint the other tree that's beside it that starts here. But this one has all its leaves on it still. Whoops. So I'm going to kind of only paint certain sections of it, I suppose. Okay, and this one is a nice, beautiful yellow color. So I'm just taking my nice bright yellow and painting it, and then we're going to darken it in the center a little bit where the sun doesn't reach it quite. So I always like to start with, not always, I shouldn't say that. In this situation, I'm starting with brighter colors first and then I'm darkening them. It's a lot easier to do that than the reverse. And we're going to have to darken it because you can see that our horizon is darker than the yellow that I'm using. That's a nice, beautiful yellow. And we're just going to darken it. So I'm using brown mixed with yellow. And just going over it in certain sections. Now I'm going to paint the posts. I'm going to use black mixed with brown for a nice dark brown. And so I had painted, or not painted, but I penciled in like a rough shape for my posts earlier, but now that it's covered in paint, it's kind of hard to see. So the tip I'm going to give you is you want your posts to all stay at the same height at the top. At the top, they will all reach the exact same line, I suppose. The only difference, like where they change, is that diagonal line. So if you want to draw a line for yourself like this, each one will start on that line and will end in the exact same point. And the further they are from the viewer, the closer they are together, because it's like, you can see my reference photo here. See, they're all on one plane, one line, but they start at different, the bottom is higher with each one. And the distance between them becomes smaller as they move away from the viewer. So I really cannot see where my next one is. So I'm just gonna hope that it is here somewhere. And you want to make them a little bit thinner as well, because they're further from the viewer. And darker. I don't know if I said that already. I could have another one here, but I'm not going to. And in my photo, they're connected by like this wire poultry netting, but I don't think that looks very nice. So instead, I'm first going to pencil in so I don't destroy the painting. Yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. So you can just connect them roughly with these parallel lines, and they don't have to be exactly the same from one to the next. In fact, if they're not the same, that's what will make them look pretty neat. Like that. So that already that looks so much better. It's just coming together with every additional detail that we paint. So the last major thing we have to add is the trees, which are going to be on our left side here. So I'm taking black and brown, mixing those guys together. And how am I gonna paint this? So it's gonna be mainly my first tree here that just sticks out the most, or is the most prominent. So this one is just gonna go straight to the edge of the paper. And up. Like so. I do want to fade it out slightly at the bottom here so that it's not such a harsh transition. That's a bit better. And then what I also want to do is leave gaps in my tree trunk. And I'll tell you why. It is because I want to paint leaves in those gaps, and if I just painted it all brown first, then the leaves, because they're lighter than the brown, they wouldn't show through, unfortunately. So you can just leave some gaps in your tree trunk that will be filled in with leaves later. So my tree here, I think I'm going to make it go all the way to the top of the page, just as it does in my reference photo. That is a tall tree. And of course it has branches that fly outwards. So before I keep painting the tree any longer, I am gonna just add those leaves in real quick. So nice bright orange. Maybe mix in a little brown there and fill in those gaps. And what I'm gonna do, actually, we're gonna do the same thing that we did before. So first we're gonna create kind of this orange backwash, I guess, in the places that we're gonna be painting the leaves. And I'm gonna do that everywhere, because then it'll make painting the leaves so much easier. But I'm gonna actually switch. I'm gonna switch brushes here because that was taking too long with the little one. So I'm kind of going on to the trunk in certain sections, and that's okay. I'm pulling some of that color out to make room for the brightness of the leaves that we're going to be painting. Okay, I'm satisfied with that. I know it kind of looks like we ruined the photo by doing that, but trust me, it makes the process easier when you're painting individual details. You don't have to cover like these tiny white spaces if it's already filled with a bit of orange anyways. So you can start working while that's still wet and just add the leaf details. So what I'm doing here is almost bordering that area that I painted, the background painting, before I start going in to the center. You don't have to do that, that's just what I'm doing. So I'm gonna go in with a few more branches, I think. So I'm gonna have one that's coming out here. I'm gonna switch to my quadruple 0. For the ultra tiny branch details. And I'm gonna have some actually coming down here. I'll zoom in for this part because it'll fill in this blank space over here. So I'm gonna switch paintbrushes again for my slightly bigger one. And have just a few kind of swooping down here. So that looks pretty neat when you zoom out and you look at that as a whole. I am going to darken my trunk a little bit more. And we can add a few leaves to the ends there. And you can start, using darker hues of your original colors to dab on some additional leaf details. I'm just using my bigger brush here and blotching on darker or more vibrant orange in certain sections. In, larger patches. And I'm gonna add a tad bit of yellow in there just to add a bit of more color. All right, I'm just seeing what else we can add here. I'm gonna add another tree coming up like this. Just the trunk rather, you're not gonna see very much else there. Other than that, I think that's almost, I might add just a touch more yellow over here, just to make that vibrant, even more so than it was. And also, I'm adding those big blotches of color, just like we did on the tree, because I kind of like how that looks more, because it fills in more space, it fills in more color, and we've already got one layer down, so I'm just going over it and filling in those little white gaps everywhere. See, I like that much more. I don't know about you guys. It's nice because it makes that road so much less bright. And I'm gonna add just a tad bit of green here as well in this section. See, I think that looks a lot better. Let me know what you think in the comments, if you think that kind of ruined it or you prefer that additional layer of color. Okay, we are all finished. Here is the original, or my reference photo. Let me know what you guys think. If you enjoyed this tutorial, don't forget to subscribe, hit like on this video, and I'll see you in the next one.